The tide does not forget what the wind tries to sweep away. In the bustling port of Lagos, where wooden canoes kissed the water and the air tasted of salt and harmattan dust, a woman's scream was swallowed by festival drums. It was the night of the Tide Festival, when the city danced on the edge of the ocean, believing the waves would carry their sins out to sea. But the ocean has a memory sharper than any ledger, and on that night it began to write a story that would shake the foundations of power and pride. Amara Okoye crouched beside her fish stall, her fingers numb from scaling mackerel since dawn. She was 22, but the lines around her eyes belonged to a woman twice her age. The market women called her the girl who talks to the bell because a small brass bell hung from her waist, a gift from a father whose boat had never returned from a storm 10 years ago. She rang it softly when a customer approached, not for luck, but because the sound reminded her that someone had once believed she deserved a voice. Across the plaza, Kemi Bankole glittered beneath camera flashes. Married into the Bankole shipping dynasty, she wore charity like a crown, her smile a polished blade. Her mother-in-law, Mama Ebere, walked 3 steps behind, a hawk-eyed matriarch whose silence carried the weight of old money and older Shua Shin expectations. Mama Ebere had discovered something in the charity ledgers, numbers that did not sing the same song as Kemi's public speeches. She had confronted her daughter-in-law that morning, her voice a low thunder. "The mouths you claim to feed are hungrier because of you." Kemi had laughed, the sound like glass breaking on concrete. "Mother, the cameras love a generous queen. The hungry don't vote on Instagram." But Mama Ebere had threatened to tell her son to unravel the empire of hashtags and hollow donations. Kemi could not let that happen. So she invited Mama Ebere to the Tide Festival, to the cliff path where the lighthouse stood like a lonely god and where the ocean roared loud enough to hide a fall. Amara saw them from her stall. She saw Kemi's hand, pale and perfect, guide Mama Ebere toward the edge. She saw the older woman stumble, her arms windmilling, and then she saw the push, not a violent shove, but a delicate, practiced, deliberate nudge, as if Kemi were brushing lint from a sleeve. Mama Ebere disappeared over the edge, her scream a thin thread snapped by the Winshan Ko wind. Amara dropped her knife. She ran, her bare feet slapping Dajahuo Slil, slapping the Cob Shiyu, slapping the cobblestones, the brass bell at her waist clanging wildly. She reached the cliff path as Kemi turned, her face a mask of shock that did not reach her eyes. "She fell," Kemi whispered, then louder. "She fell. The old woman lost her balance." But Amara had seen. She opened her mouth to speak, and Kemi's eyes narrowed. The influencer's gaze flicked to the brass bell, then to Amara's threadbare dress, to the fish scales still clinging to her skin. A calculation happened behind those eyes, faster than the tide. "She pushed her," Kemi shouted, pointing at Amara. "This girl, she rushed at us, she was angry, she wanted money. She pushed my mother-in-law." The crowd turned. The drums faltered. Amara felt the weight of 100 stares, heavy as stones. She tried to speak, but her voice was a reed against the ocean's roar. Kemi's followers raised their phones, live streaming the accusation, the hashtags already forming. "Justice for Mama Bear. Market girl murderer." A man limped forward from the shadows of the lighthouse. He was called Old Kola, the dock janitor, his back bent, his clothes smelling of diesel and salt. He leaned on a wooden staff, his eyes the color of storm clouds. He had been sweeping the same path for 3 years, invisible as the wind. He had watched Kemi's charity shows, had seen the ledger's ghosts, and he had watched Amara ring her bell for customers who barely paid. He knew the shape of truth requires truth. "Let the girl speak," he said, his voice a low rumble. Kemi's lip curled. "You? A cleaner? You would defend a murderer?" Old Kola did not flinch. He looked at Amara, and in his gaze she saw something she had not seen in years, belief. But the crowd was already moving, their anger a wave-building, project building, and Kemi's voice rose above it all, sweet as poisoned honey. "Arrest her," she commanded, and the police, who owed favors to the Bankole name, stepped forward. Amara's world narrowed to the clang of her bell, the grip of rough hands and the taste of salt on her lips, whether from the ocean or her own tears she could not tell. She was dragged away, her stall overturned, her fish scattered for the gulls. The last thing she saw was Kemi's smile, small and satisfied, before the darkness of the police van swallowed her whole. The ocean, meanwhile, lapped at the rocks below, cradling Mama Ebere's broken body with a tenderness no one on the cliff could muster. The tide was coming in, and it remembered everything. If this story has already gripped your heart, please like and subscribe. What unfolds next will make the ground shake beneath the powerful. Now, let us follow Amara into the cell where the walls whisper secrets and the janitor's shadow grows longer. The holding cell smelled of rust and regret and other people's fear. Amara sat on a concrete bench, her arms wrapped around her knees, the brass bell silent now, tucked beneath her dress. She had told the officer her story, but the officer had yawned, her pen scratching lies onto paper. Kemi Bancole says you pushed the old woman. She has video. The video showed Amara running, reaching out, but the angle made her outstretched hands look like a shove. Kemi's team had edited the truth into a weapon. A key turned in the lock. Old Kola stood there, his limp more pronounced, his staff tapping the floor. Come, he said simply. Amara blinked. I'm under arrest. Not anymore, he replied. The sergeant owes me a favor, a small one. I sweep his mother's veranda every Sunday. She followed him out, past the desk where the officer now stared at her shoes, past the gate that squealed open. Outside, the night had deepened, the festival lights distant and cruel. Old Kola led her to a tin-roof shack by the harbor, no larger than her stall, but dry and safe. He handed her a bowl of pepper soup, the steam carrying the scent of home. Eat, he said. Tomorrow the tide brings new battles. She ate, and for the first time in hours her hands stopped shaking. She looked at him, at the lines on his face, the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. Why help me? He stared at the ocean through the open door. Because I have seen what happens when the powerful write the story. Someone must hold the pen. For 3 days, Amara stayed hidden. Old Kola brought her fish to sell, mended her net, and taught her how to read the tide tables the harbor masters used. She learned that the tide's timing was a secret the rich-kept Shuju kept to themselves, a code that decided when ships came and when they left, when prices rose and when they fell. She learned that Kemi's charity gala was scheduled for the full moon, when the tide was highest, and the cameras could capture her generosity against the backdrop of a floodlit pier. On the 4th day, Kemi struck again. Inspector Halima Danjuma, a woman with honest eyes and a corrupt leash around her neck, arrived at the shack. She held a plastic bag containing a phone and a roll of cash. Amara Okoye, we have evidence you stole from Kemi Bancole's charity fund. This phone has messages from you demanding payment for silence. This cash was found in your fish bucket. Amara's blood turned to ice. I have no phone. I have never touched that money. Old Kola stepped between them, his staff raised not as a weapon, but as a barrier. Inspector, you know this girl has been here, under my eye. Those items were planted. Halima's jaw tightened. The Bancole family has filed charges. I must take her in. Amara looked at Old Kola, expecting his faith to waver. Instead, he handed her the brass bell. Ring this when you need to be heard. The sound carries further than you think. She was taken away again, this time to a different cell, cleaner, but colder. The charge was theft and extortion. The penalty, if the other inmates whispered, could be 7 years. 7 years for a crime she did not commit, for a truth she had witnessed. She sat in the dark, the bell cold in her palm, and wondered if the ocean truly remembered, or if it simply wadi, if it simply swallowed and forgot. But the ocean had not forgotten. Old Kola had not forgotten. And in the shadows of the harbor, a man who limped and swept was watching the ledgers, the tides, and the woman who thought she owned them both. The night before the charity gala, Kemi Bancole stood on her balcony, the ocean spread before her like a conquered kingdom. She felt invincible. She had buried Mama Ebere's truth beneath layers of hashtags, had framed the fish girl with evidence no court would question, and had secured her place as the queen of coastal compassion. Her phone buzzed with confirmations. Celebrities, politicians, even the harbor commissioner would attend. The gala would raise millions, most of which would vanish into accounts she controlled. She did not see the janitor below, sweeping the pier with methodical strokes, his staff tapping a rhythm that matched the tide's pulse. She did not know that every receipt she had forged, every number she had altered, had been photographed by a man who owned the security cameras she thought were hers. She did not know that the limp was real, a souvenir from a charity scam that had cost his sister her life, and that his silence was not weakness, but a hunter's patience. Old Kola, Tunde Adebayo, though no one had called him that in years, watched Kemi's silhouette against the moon. He had built an empire of shipping and digital payments from nothing, then disappeared into the docks to see how the powerful treated the powerless. He had seen Kemi's cruelty, her public humiliation of Amara, her push of Mama Ebere. He had waited for the right wave, the right moment when the tide would turn. The gala arrived. The pier blazed with lights, the music swelled, and Kemi stood at the podium, her voice honeyed as she spoke, and as she spoke of empowering market women. Amara sat in her cell, the bell in her hand, the sound of the festival a distant mockery. Then the lights flickered, the music died. A screen behind Kemi lit up, and on it played a video. Beiku played a video, not the edited clip of Amara, but the raw footage from the cliff path, captured by a camera Kemi did not know existed. The crowd gasped. Kemi's smile froze. The video showed her hand, delicate and deliberate, guiding Mama Ebere to the edge. It showed the push. It showed her turn, her eyes meeting the lens with a confidence that now looked like madness. Tunde Adebayo walked onto the stage, his limp gone, his back straight, his staff now a symbol of authority. He wore the simple clothes of old Kola, but his voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of a man who owned the harbor and the hearts of those who worked it. Kemi Bankole, he said, you thought the tide would carry your sins away, but the tide belongs to everyone, and it remembers. The police, led by Inspector Halima, who had finally snapped her corrupt leash, moved to arrest Kemi. But Kemi's backers, the shadow investors who had profited from her charity scam, were already moving. They sent enforcers to seize the servers, to burn the evidence, to make Tunde Adebayo disappear as easily as they had made Mama Ebere fall. The enforcers arrived at the harbor, their faces hard, their hands reaching for Tunde. But the market women stepped forward, led by Chika and Fatai, Amara's friends. They rang bells. Every one of them had a bell, small and brass, the symbol of their trade. The sound was a chorus, a tide of noise that drowned out the enforcers' threats. The harbor workers joined, then the fishermen, then the children. The city rang with bells, and the enforcers, faced with a wall of sound and solidarity, lowered their hands. Kemi Bankole was arrested. The video spread like wildfire, and the charity money was traced, every stolen naira accounted for. Mama Ebere's body was recovered from the rocks, and though she could not speak, the ocean had spoken for her. Amara was released. Tunde Adebayo offered her a choice: a scholarship to study marine law, a chance to protect the harbor and the people who lived by its rhythm, or a sum of money large enough to leave forever. She chose the scholarship, but she also chose to keep her stall, to ring her bell, to be the girl who talked to the tide. The city celebrated. Kemi's empire crumbled, her followers unfollowed, her name a synonym for poisoned charity. But in the quiet of Tunde's office, Amara found a document, yellowed with age. It was a shipping manifest from 10 years ago, the night her father's boat vanished. It listed a cargo of fish, a destination, and the owner of the vessel, Adebayo Shipping Lines. Her heart stopped. The man who had saved her, who had watched her suffer, whose company had owned the boat that took her father, had he known? Had he watched her ring that bell, knowing his empire had silenced her father's voice? She held the manifest, the brass bell cold against her skin. The ocean whispered outside, and she understood that justice was not a single wave, but a tide that kept returning, bringing new truths with each turn. The moral is simple. Those who use power to silence others will find that silence becomes the loudest accusation. The tide does not forget, and neither should we. When we stand together, even the smallest bell can ring louder than the mightiest empire. We hope you enjoyed this powerful story. Share your thoughts in the comments, like this video if you haven't already, and subscribe so you don't miss the next gripping tale.